Hello, everyone. Welcome to BiogasWorld's UK month webinar discussing the opportunities and challenges of the UK biogas market. As a reminder, the webinar is being recorded and will be shared with participants following the webinar. In addition, if you have any questions for our presenters, we invite you to write them in the chat, and we will ask our presenters following their presentations or in the Q&A at the end of the webinar. Biogas World hosts new country-focused webinars each month to discuss the opportunities and challenges within various markets. If you're interested in these topics, please join us tomorrow for our discussion on the Benelux market. We'll be sharing the link for that in the chat for any of those that are interested. And be sure to join us on our biogas community website for the latest updates and to network with companies in the biogas and biomethane industry. I would like to thank our presenters for joining us today. Sara Bartle, Green Gas and Hydrogen Policy Lead at the Association for Renewable Energy and Clean Technology. Dr. Nick Primmer, Policy Lead at Future Biogas. And Kai Oosterheert, Manager of Installations and Sales at Membrane Systems Europe. Our presenters bring us a diverse range of perspectives on the UK market. The Association for Renewable Energy and Clean Technology are the industry association for the UK, advocating for the renewables industry to the UK government. Future Biogas is a project developer and operator operating across the UK, and Membrane Systems Europe are an equipment supplier for biogas digesters with extensive portfolio in the UK. Our first presenter today is Sara Bartle. Sara is the Green Gas and Hydrogen Policy Lead for REA, one of the UK's largest renewable energy associations with over 500 members. Sara, I will pass the floor over to you.
Okay, thank you, Ryan, and thank you to BiogasWorld for the invite to today's webinar. I'm very appreciative of the invite and hope that everyone on the call actually finds the information useful. So as I said, I'm policy lead, so I'm going to take a very much more sort of policy and sort of regulations lead on or stance on what happens, because I know we've obviously got other people on the call that can be more specific on in terms of the actual operations and production side of it. So if you can move on to the next slide, please. So I'm going to start with obviously looking at the how the UK policy has supported biomethane production up till now. There's been quite a big recognition within government that support has been needed for specifically anaerobic digestion, but obviously increasingly more some other production methods and technologies for biomethane due to the high capex and opex costs that normally associated with this kind of technology. So generally we've sort of it's important to actually see in terms of successes how the sort of support mechanisms have moved through the years so far, just to understand where we stand with it and obviously why decisions are going to be made further forward. So just generally there has been sort of rather sort of mixed results coming forward. So originally we started with renewable obligations that started in sort of 2002. It was sort of really targeting general electricity production plants. So it was open to anaerobic digestion plants. You can see there that actually there was approximately 26 plants that actually sort of signed up under the renewable obligation scheme. Closed to applicants in 2017, and that was obviously focused very much on electricity production, as was sort of quite traditional with this sort of method moving forward, or sort of from the past. But obviously that was quite disadvantaging smaller scale plants, of which traditionally we have quite a lot of sort of need, especially sort of smaller sort of more agricultural sort of small scale style. So as part of that, the sort of feed-in tariff was introduced in 2010, providing a similar length of contract support for about 20 years, and that ran until 2019, and that had quite a significant impact on the deployment of anaerobic digestion plants, with approximately sort of 420 sort of plus plants that signed up for those contracts. So it really boosted the industry, and we suddenly saw a lot of sort of anaerobic digestion, sort of biogas production, again generating electricity. So when that closed, obviously there was a need to sort of possibly look at what could also happen. I don't think the date is particularly possibly right on the smart export guarantee, because obviously that would have followed, so apologies for that. But it's still running today. It was a variable contract support, still targeting small scale production plants. But due to the fact that it was very much based on the sort of electrical suppliers rather than the generators, and they could give variable contract support, and there was not a lot of incentive to try and sort of build a plant out of it because of the way that it was set up. To my understanding, no plants actually have engaged with that, or not that I'm aware. And similarly, there was a contract for difference scheme that sort of came out in 2014, which obviously went across all of the renewable energy sector, very much targeting those which were over 5 megawatts. Again, anaerobic digestion plants, it was open to them, but it didn't actually capture any plants from that, and originally wind and solar plants seemed to have the main focus within those schemes. So that was where we were until government decided that there was a significant value in actually getting heat generated and decarbonising the heat system. So a renewable heat incentive was set up in 2014 to encourage the use of heat generation from plants, including anaerobic digestion plants. So it's a larger range on that, a set contract support year time scale, which was far more suitable. That ran until 2022, is extended to a year because of COVID, and we saw 38 plants actually sign up, or roughly 38 plants sign up under that. The difference with this being is that sudden shift between sort of biogas and biomethane production. So that was obviously requiring a gas grid connection. So it still seemed to balance it a little bit more, and we were starting to see a bit of an increase. So we moved over to a green gas support scheme in 2021. There's a bit of an overlap, obviously due to COVID. That slightly less contract support years, down to 15. It did sort of cover a scale of plant which was up to 250 gigawatt hours. But as it stands at the moment, we've only got one registered participant of this. It's not to say that there's not people moving through the system, but still currently only one. And that was very much focused on biomethane grid injection. That's currently where we are. We'll talk a bit more about green gas support scheme, but also worth mentioning that there is other options in terms of biomethane production for renewable transport fuels, and the RTFO also exists, and also can work hand in hand with some of the latter schemes. The renewable heat incentive and the green gas support scheme allow a flexibility of either using one or the other within a quarter of a payment scheme. So if you can move to the next slide, please. So one of the reasons why sort of at the moment we've sort of need to look at where we are with biomethane production in the UK is because the green gas support scheme clearly hasn't been quite as it hasn't had such a good take up as we've seen in previous support schemes. Something that the government looked at quite a lot. There are sort of annual tariff reviews. There was also a mid-scheme review that we went through, where obviously asking industry to engage on what was going well, what not going so well. And obviously I've included that table there. You can see some of the sort of progress as we've gone from sort of 2022 up to sort of present time. You can see that there's been quite a lot of scheme applications. Some of those will have been rejected along the way. Some have then been granted for that initial notice tariff guarantee, moving on to the closer to a registered participant being the tariff guarantees. And so we've still got a few that could be going through, but we still sat with that one registered user for a while. So there was two things that happened. They tried to change the tier 3 tariff to try and encourage higher sort of production, latter part of that tier 3, because it's banded. That was changed in October 2023, because originally it was a much lower rate. It's now more comparable with the first tier 1 and tier 2. There was also, following the mid-scheme review, there was a extension. Originally it was supposed to finish in November 2025, but because of the take-up and initial issues, which they've tried to allow an additional time, They've now increased that to March 2028, and that was passed into law on the 4th of June, so quite recently. They've also allowed for an exemption for heat supplied by eligible heat pumps, because there was some sort of difficulty in trying to include that in the previous system. So they have tried to do some more to encourage it, and there's certainly sort of more plants that seem to have been coming forward now, but there's recognition from the government that this probably hasn't worked, and certainly from industry saying it's not incentivizing that much in terms of smaller scale plants, especially those that can't connect to the gas grid. So if we move on to the next slide. So these are some of the barriers that have been recognised as some of the problems that have existed in there. Certainly planning, I'm sure, is a universal issue in terms of trying to get something through planning in the planning system. And this is being borne through sort of also a lack of sort of staff moving, sort of staff attention, lack of experience within staff, but also delays in the general process, as well as maybe objections from local residents for a new plant going in their backyard. But also we have the Environment Agency that requires issuing a permit, and that has had similar problems in terms of trying to get things moving through the process. So that has caused delays, which then ultimately mean delays in trying to actually join a process such as a scheme, such as the Green Gas Support Scheme. There have been other policy and regulations which are quite a factor how well you can progress through, and we've currently got a policy of simpler recycling, which was to try and encourage mandatory food waste collections from all local authority collections, whereas previously it had been very much determined on the site specific place of what they would actually want. In sort of Wales and Scotland, they've already introduced sort of more mandatory food waste collection. So that has taken a long time to come out, and we're still going to be seeing a few years when that will sort of take it in place for certain local authorities, and that has created some delays in terms of ability for feedstocks. We've also got a couple of quality protocols for biomethane. I think there's also one for digestate that's taken a very long time for the Environment Agency to start pushing through. And then there's also some additional issues, such as how biomethane is classified under the UK version of the emissions system in the UK ETS. The changes over in Europe in Union database, how that's treated in particular with certification trading, and also market-based reporting under the greenhouse gas protocol and the scientific or the SBTI sort of reporting systems. And one of the biggest issues, as mentioned earlier, is the access and connections restrictions to the gas grid. So it can cost an awful lot to get connected, and if you're in the wrong place, you can either have a very much a no, or a very, we can only give you this amount. So it can cause a lot of problems, depending on where the location might be right for a planning application, or where everything else may tick the boxes, but you may not actually have the grid connection that you need. Also, low flow restrictions, particularly in the summer months when the gas isn't needed so much, because a lot of the gas connections happen for the gas delivery networks rather than the transmission system. So we have found some people that have ended up having to sort of not put in during certain times of the day or certain sort of periods of the summer, which can cause a lot of problems for a plant that is designed to run pretty much all the time. And the other one is the quality requirements requiring a degree of propane addition to try and balance what you can put into the grid, which can vary very much between different places. So there's the lack of consistency there, and the industry's been doing quite a lot to try and push other options for dealing with all of those restrictions. So we can move on to the next slide. So what happened, so it closed in the 25th of April 2024, was a future biomethane framework. It was a call for evidence sort of run by the government to try and sort of address some of the issues and to really sort of look at what we could do in the future when the Green Gas Support Scheme finally ends. So obviously they've given themselves a bit of breathing space by extending it to 2028, but this not necessarily mean that this is when this may start, because there could be some sort of transitional period. But it's obviously, I've included the link in there if we're sharing the slides after, which I'm happy to do, then obviously people can go and have a look at it separately. But generally there's some good inclusions, I think, in the what was there. They try to incorporate a lot of the principles I think industry is generally moving towards, which is sort of a much more sustainable process in how we manage methane, how we manage sort of the land use and sort of crops as well, dealing with the sort of general security of producing biomethane to decarbonize the gas grid and general sort of heating, but also making sure that you've got security of feedstock, then looking at the commercial viability, adaptability. So it was a really good sort of basis of what they were doing. They included a lot of different technologies in this call for evidence, including the small scale gasification plants, landfill gas, which was previously exempt, but they also started to look at the discussions between what if we convert a site that's already being used under the feed-in tariff, for instance, or even sort of look at expansions, acknowledging the fact that some of those asset build costs then would be reduced, so it would make it more financially viable. But quite importantly, there was also a discussion about setting a production target. So I think we've generally sort of stressed within our responses that there are other means by which to try and remove that sort of element of subsidized into the biomethane production, but things will need to change in order for that to be the case. And so at this stage within this call for evidence, those weren't set, so it was very difficult to be able to say that that could happen. However, if it is included within UK ETS rather than being similar to fossil, then we're going to have a much better sort of ability to be used within market-based reporting, and a much higher value for green gas certificates, because there is a value for them at the moment, and certainly our sister organisation REAL, who manage the green gas certification scheme, they actually are working on this a lot. So that balance as well with selling, trading over to other parts of Europe and even to America, is quite important. So I think the union database is something that's going to need for us to sort of look at as we're now classified as a third party. There's a couple of payment mechanisms they suggested, CFD, which is obviously quite popular in terms of the UK policy, but also a supplier obligation, which is more similar to the renewable obligation or the RTFO that we've currently got. But obviously we've acknowledged the fact that they're not going to work for all scales. So maybe some other options need to be considered. And obviously there's a lot of move towards the carbon capture. So, that could possibly be a very good benefit of revenue in the future, but, it can also sort of benefit the industry quite a lot. So if we move on to the next slide, I think I'm moving towards the end. So there was a couple of other policies that actually or related consultations that are coming out. I think I've mentioned about the carbon side of it. So there is a lot of changing policies on this, which kind of interconnected at the moment that is currently underway being looked at. So the cross-border adjustment mechanism of CBAM, I'm sure most people would be relatively familiar with, that need to not have any sort of carbon leakage and move a high carbon intense industry over somewhere else to sort of remove the problem, but also looking a lot more at sort of the carbon capture and storage, which is quite important to the industry at the moment, and as is mentioned already, the UK emissions trading scheme, and how that's dealt with in that. We've also got sort of production through sort of the other renewable fuels, such as the SAF, which is the sustainable aviation fuels, as well as the renewable transport fuels in general. And we've got a similar sort of biomethane production consultation that's happening in Northern Ireland to try and bring that in alignment, which it currently hadn't been under the scheme so far. So I think generally, depending on how this future biomethane framework works out, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. But hopefully it will be as ambitious as I think the this framework actually pushed through. So hopefully we'll be expecting to see something at the end of the year on that. But I think that's all of my slides. So that's me finished. So I think it's open to the floor for any initial questions on that, or they can be at the end, I understand. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. One question before we move on to our next presentation. Is the industry supportive of a UK biomethane target? And what should that be, do you think?
I'd probably expect to see Nick nod as well. It's very much say yes. We need a target to drive it through. At the moment, in the biomethane strategy document, it was suggested that there is potential for 30 to 40 terawatt hours of production by 2050, but it was only a suggestion. It wasn't a physical target. So I think that's part of the framework. There's a big chunk in there as to sort of discussing whether it was something that we wanted, and it was very much yes, because until you have a target, it's very difficult to get not just the drive and the ambition forward, but actually to have something to leverage what you need to move through policy to try and sort of give a determination of it. And we've seen within the EU repower, they've set quite an ambitious, I think it's 35 billion cubic meters by 2030, which is equivalent to 350 terawatt hours. And ambitions to sort of double what the 2022 sort of biomethane was. So as soon as you start having that, industry has a lot more, it's kind of de-risked a lot more because it knows it's got that commitment to move things forward.
Great, thank you. Next, thank you for your presentation. Next, we have Dr. Nick Primmer. Nick leads Future Biogas's engagement with government and associations, ensuring effective policies and regulations are in place for the delivery of Project Carbon Harvest, a venture to design and operate the UK's next generation of 80 plants, delivering bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. Previously, Nick worked as policy lead for the World Biogas Association, where he has authored the report Biogas Pathways to 2030. Recommending key policies to help scale up the biogas sector to its full potential. Nick, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Yeah, you can hear me. Yeah, thanks very much, Ryan, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. Yeah, as per the introduction, I'm Nick Primmer. I'm the policy lead at Future Biogas, and I'm going to talk today a bit about the challenges around gas decarbonisation in the UK, the opportunity for biomethane, and some of those sort of barriers and opportunities that are presenting themselves through policy over the next few years. So just by means of a quick introduction about Future Biogas. Future Biogas are an owner, operator and developer of biomethane plants in the UK. And we are currently one of the largest producers of biomethane per year, generating about 0.5 terawatt hour of green gas from our 12 operational plants. But we also have quite ambitious growth, in the pipeline. So we're looking to build and operate an additional 20 large biomethane plants, of which I'm going to sort of be discussing later on in this presentation. And all of this new development and growth is being facilitated by our sort of new majority stakeholders, which are 3i Infrastructure, a FTSE 250 company that have really given us the financial backing to push on with our sort of scaling up and new developments. So let's first take a look at the UK's gas sector and consider why it is so difficult to decarbonise. What are the key challenges in the UK's transition to net zero. So today we use around 1,000 terawatt hours of gas per year across the UK, and 99.5% of that is fossil natural gas. And you can see the general breakdown through the UK. And this presents one of the main challenges of gas decarbonisation. It is used in multiple different sectors, from power generation, domestic heat, transport, industry. It's used across different uses. It's used as sources of heat, as a molecule, a sort of hydrocarbon molecule to transform into new products, non-energy products. All of these different sources, all of these different end uses for this valuable gas. So the challenge is, how do we tackle that? And unlike electricity, which has multiple different technologies which can produce renewable electricity, there aren't really many different technologies that can produce renewable gas. You're really left down to two. So hydrogen, which has a lot of technological and economic barriers, and biomethane, a ready-to-use, demonstratable technology that's already being deployed across the UK. So to tackle the UK's gas sector, we are fundamentally going to have to change how it looks. And the first thing we should be doing across the UK is looking at how to reduce that demand. We can take that demand down from 1,000 to around 100 to 300 terawatt hours is generally considered the sort of unavoidable gas demand of the future. This is a system where power generation is increasingly from wind and solar, so that gas is only used perhaps to provide that baseload capacity, or even that peak generation when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining and you need a bit of gas to sort of keep that energy system going. And similarly, you've decarbonized or electrified much of a low-grade heat, so using heat pumps wherever possible. In industries, electrifying heat if it's not particularly intense heat that's required. And similarly with transport, and industry, electrification of transport, again, wherever possible. All the result of which bringing down to that unavoidable gas demand. And then that is what we must focus our valuable biomethane on, to decarbonize that. So it's about using less, but spending more on that better, higher quality product, which is needed in this net zero transition. So what can biomethane do to fulfill that unavoidable gas demand? Recent research has suggested that across the UK, we could easily produce over 100 terawatt hours of biomethane per year from sustainable feedstocks. That includes your food waste, livestock wastes, grassland from pasture land and sort of animal livestock, rotational crops, so re-looking at how we grow crops for food and longer rotational cycles, and also crop residues from the sort of processing of those crops themselves for food markets. So at 100 terawatt hours, we could feasibly fulfill the UK's entire unavoidable gas demand at the lower end, or at least, half, a third, whatever that final number is, a significant material proportion of the future heat demand in the UK. And at the moment, we as an industry are doing well. 6 to 7 terawatt hours of biomethane is currently produced from its 120 operational plants. That puts us in the sort of top 5 biomethane producing countries in Europe. And we've got an additional 10 terawatt hours of biogas, which is currently being used to generate electricity as per the support schemes that Sara was discussing. And that's more energy, more gas that could potentially be converted into biomethane, into this sort of valuable heat demand for heat decarbonisation. But as I say, there is a lot of room for growth of these figures. And at the moment, again, based on the policy that Sara was mentioning, that a lot of the policy focus has been around your wastes and residues. And that's because they deliver, it is recognised within government that recycling of waste into energy can deliver those wider externalities in terms of waste recycling, which is certainly true. And those estimates for the future potential from DESNES of 30 to 40 terawatt hours, which Sarah mentioned, that's really waste only. It's a very waste focused estimate. And actually, if you look at this future potential, a lot of these feedstock and the potential is from your non-waste streams. In particular, as from Future Biogas's perspective, your rotational crops. So what this means is instead of monocropping your wheat year after year after year, which leads to soil degradation, the increased exposure to pests and disease, you look at a more diverse and longer crop rotation, whereby you're rotating different crops through a 5-6 year period. And within that rotation, one of those crops is a break crop, and that can be a break crop grown for AD. So that is a new source of biomass for biogas production that can support a transition to more sustainable arable agricultural practices. And that's exactly what we're doing at Future Biogas. So we are getting into contracts with farmers to supply rotational crops using regenerative farming practices throughout that cycle. So it's not just about the crop rotation, it's about use of cover crops over winter to protect your soils. It's the use of digestate back to land as a source of renewable biofertilizer. It's the reduction in tillage to, again, protect the soil and maintain the sort of organic contents of your agricultural soils. And that practice not only supplies us with that valuable supply of high quality feedstock, but also supports carbon sequestration in the soils. We're looking at about 1.5 to 2 tons of CO2 equivalent sequestered in soil per hectare. So you're delivering a nature-based carbon removals that truly benefits the farmer and their farm. So from that gas, of course, we're producing biomethane, and one of our plants, each plant would produce up to 150 gigawatt hours of biomethane. And that's the equivalent of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 27,000 tons per year. And not only that, in the biogas upgrading process, we're capturing that biogenic CO2 and taking it for geological storage. And by locking that away into geological reserves, stores under the North Sea, we are further removing 21,000 tons of CO2, which originated from the atmosphere, and locking that away in permanent stores. And that's crucial in corporates' ability to offset unavoidable emissions. And together, this process is not only delivering that climate benefit, but it's doing so completely unsubsidized. So our model doesn't require the government subsidies such as RHI and Green Gas Support Scheme. This is a market-based business model, so that breaking away from the need for taxpayers' funded money. And if we look at that business model, so this reflects a sort of conventional AD based on government support. You can see subsidy can account for a significant proportion of a plant's income. So in many cases, it's 70% or even more of that annual take home. And that's ultimately not sustainable. The government have already said that there's not going to be another tariff-based support scheme after the Green Gas Support Scheme. So we're going to have to break that dependence on subsidy. And the way we're doing it at Future Biogas is by valorizing the CO2. So by capturing it for geological storage and generating those greenhouse gas removals, we're generating a new income stream from our products. And that can be sold to the corporates to offset those unavoidable emissions. And crucially, being unsubsidized, the biomethane holds a greater value. We're getting into long-term offtake agreements for our biomethane. Our flagship deal is with AstraZeneca, whereby we are sleeving the biomethane through the gas grid to AstraZeneca to decarbonize their gas emissions and Scope 1 emissions. And because it is unsubsidized, they are fully funding the production of that gas. And so they can claim full ownership of the carbon savings that have been generated. And this gets around those increasing concerns about greenwashing, whereby a company that's buying an RGGO from subsidized gas, increasingly is that biomethane certificate that's been sold truly representative of the cost of production? And therefore, can that company truly claim ownership of those carbon savings? And would those carbon savings have happened regardless, even if that biomethane certificate had never been sold, because the subsidy was there? So this is the sort of concept of additionality. And if you can't claim additionality, are you really delivering a climate benefit? So this is the value of that unsubsidized gas. And by getting into long-term offtake agreement, so with AstraZeneca, as is a 15-year offtake agreement, we're replicating that financial stability that has been long provided from your support schemes. So your 20-year RHI support or your 15-year greenhouse gas support. So that's really de-risking the investment, de-risking the deal and the market to give us the confidence to build new plants under this model. So as I mentioned, here is a map of the sort of 120 biomethane plants currently in operation, producing 6 to 7 terawatt hours per year, all of which subsidized by taxpayers. And we are now building this first unsubsidized plant in the UK, in Lincolnshire. So this is due to come online early 2025, and this is the plant that will be supplying AstraZeneca with its unsubsidized biomethane. And just to sort of summarize, conclude these points, this approach represents a new approach to AD in the UK. It's working with farmers to decarbonize their production, allowing them to produce lower carbon food and energy and de-risk their practices, while supplying us with a secure supply of high quality feedstock. We benefit from predictable feedstock pricing and a secure supply which we can predict year on year. We're also helping decarbonize industry, improve soil health, sequester carbon, develop the growing greenhouse gas removals industry, and ultimately all of this combines to deliver benefits to the UK. So I'll leave it there and happy to take any questions. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for your presentation, Nick. One question I have, like, your business model is very interesting, as you do not rely on subsidies. So do you think this is a model that will be adopted by the industry at large, or do you think the industry, at least in the UK, is still going to try to rely on those government supports?
I think all the while the government supports are there, people, of course, are going to use them. It's a very secure business model because your income is guaranteed by government. But I think there, we know there's a deadline to that approach, and the industry, if it's going to continue to operate and grow, it's going to have to transition to an unsubsidized model. But as Sarah was saying, this model is reliant on voluntary targets. It relies on companies like AstraZeneca doing the right thing and pushing forwards with decarbonisation. What we really now need is policy to also push the rest of the industry, making sure that more companies have to decarbonise and incorporate it into the UK ETS, for example, to make sure it's not just the voluntary markets, also on the compliance market. And that will facilitate companies willing to pay that premium for unsubsidized gas.
Great, thank you. Thanks for your presentation. Next, we have Kai Oosterheert. Kai has been manager of installations and sales at Membrane Systems Europe since 2018. Kai is responsible for managing all the installations teams MSC has worldwide, which are deployed on various projects from his hometown in the Netherlands to Tokyo. Kai, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you for your introduction. Sorry on behalf of my colleague Jan Zengering, who got stuck in the airport yesterday evening and is currently in the air flying back to the office. So I'm taking over, last moment from him. My name is Kai Oosterheert, 29 years old, based in the Netherlands at the moment. Work now for more than 6 years for Membrane Systems Europe. First, I was responsible for all the installations to support our mechanics worldwide. with our projects to install, to keep the clients informed what they're going to do and make sure projects get finished quick and safe. Membrane Systems Europe is a company founded 12 years ago. Membrane Systems Europe specialized in supplying biogas roofs, biogas domes, and all other biogas products that are on your biogas plant. With Membrane Systems Europe, we believe in a non-headache product. So we want to serve high-end quality products to sleep without any headaches. Second company we have is Dutch Cover Solutions. There we are slightly doing different things. There we produce our single membrane covers. This is just for covering manure silages, and therefore we use a hot air weld. That's a bit of a cheaper weld, but therefore we split it up in two companies. Last year, we have been recently taken over by 60% of the shares by the Search Ferrari Group. Search Ferrari produces foils and is on the French stock market. And the Search Ferrari Group supplies us the foils on the highest quality available. They do have an additional turnover each year of 400 million euros. So it's quite a big player. Search Ferrari Group is also 60% shareholder of our German biogas Dachsystemen, so Deutsche Biogas Dachsystemen. That's the same like Membrane Systems Europe, but they serve their products to only Germany, as we do worldwide. 3 years ago, we expanded our business in Spain as well by taking over a biogas. There was a local MSE, what needs to get a bit more growth. So we took them over and we supply our membranes to a biogas by Membrane Systems Europe. Last year, we had a turnover within a biogas, DBDS, and Membrane Systems Europe about 25 million euros in just roofing systems. Our unique selling point, just like I said, we don't want to have any headaches, so we want to supply the market with high quality products, and we believe in that to keep up the high lifespan of minimum of 15 years. We give, for example, 5 years full warranty on all the products, which can be expanded to even 10 years. As said, we believe in our 100% high frequent weld, so all the foils we produce have a high frequency weld to hold all the PVC foils together. Next to that, these membranes do have the lowest permeability available because you don't want to have a dirty roof that is making a smelly area around the biogas plant. To keep up competitive, because high frequency welding is more expensive than hot air welding, we've introduced the parallel design, where our other colleagues produce their roofs in pizza slices and you look on top of it, we can do a certain parallel design. And that means that the weld seams are moving straight over the roof instead of a pizza slice. And that reduces the welds with 66% of the original length. Next to that, you get a perfect round shape with that. To keep up with the market that's continuously developing, we are involved in a lot of new products that are, for example, insulation concepts on biogas covers and solar, but I'll tell you a bit more in the next slide about that. In fact, we do a turnkey installation, so the client do have projects. We make sure things get ordered and produced perfectly in line, custom made. And next to that, we install it ourselves with our team, and we have a good after-sales team that can come by or do the commissioning. We've installed more than 4,000 covers in more than 50 countries at this moment in the last 15 years. These are some of the countries we are installing in. For us, it doesn't matter what country we used to do. We will just inspect the local legislations. What are the gas things to do? What does the government need from us? For example, we are installing as we speak at Jack Daniels in Lynchburg, Tennessee, with 3 new covers. So we get everywhere, every corner of the world. To keep up with high quality, all our roofing systems that we supply are in line with Eurocode 1, 120. This has been developed in Germany. Germany is one of the builders of the biogas roofing systems, so they formed the Eurocode 1. Eurocode 1 is also covered by the TRUS 120, and that means, in fact, it's that safe that you can live as a human being underneath these systems. To keep up with the development in the market, we see a huge change at this moment where we used to generate electricity with our roofs. And nowadays, biomethane, so the biogas upgrade is coming up. At these plants, you don't easily produce your own heat anymore. So therefore, you need to heat up the tanks without getting the heat from the engine that burns the biogas. So we introduced three insulation concepts. Number one, that is a foam insulation. So the top of the inner membrane gets insulated with a 60 millimeter non-hygroscopic foam, doesn't pick up any water. This foam reduces the heat loss through a membrane with almost 50%. Next to that, we've got a thinner one, that is the low E. And low E is a special coating above the inner membrane, and this reduces the heat loss with about 20 to 25%. And you must compare this that when someone had an accident, they get picked up with an ambulance, they get a thin aluminum coat around, and the heat stays in. And then the third concept that is really interesting at the moment, because when a plant does a turnover, we can introduce the third layer membrane. That means you get a new additional membrane between the two existing membranes. So then you after insulate your operating digester without replacing the new inner membrane. So then you can be again running with an insulated roof for years. These are the U values given on these insulation versions. Let's assume that the heat loss through a normal membrane is 100%. Then with the thin aluminum coating, we reduce that heat loss to 80%. With foam, we can reduce that heat loss to about 45% through the membrane. And with the third layer, we can bring that down to almost 30%. So it's a payback system. Next to that, we are working on a new solar concept. The surfaces are used with the roof, but we can also generate more electricity on these surfaces. This is actually me, myself, installing 2.5 years ago, a pilot project where we install 8x solar panels on top of a silo. We've installed there 60 solar panels, and they generate now electricity on top of their roof. Next to that, we see that these flexible solar panels are picking up. Everyone is really interested in, and we see that the yield of these getting up as well, almost at the same level as normal traditional panels. We patented the system with a special Velcro layer. So in case of service or in case of a broken panel, we can easily replace these panels. So in fact, if a manure silo only costs you money, now it will give you payback time at a certain moment after a few years. We are not storing only biogas gases. So next to that, we are storing hydrogen. We've got a few projects here in the Netherlands that we are developing to store hydrogen within the roofs. As known, hydrogen is the smallest molecule on Earth, so it can easily penetrate these foils. We found a special way to keep them in. So there we're working on. Next to that, we are storing syngas in our membranes, and we are storing CO2. And CO2 gets often used as square crops growers, where they used to burn wood chips to heat up their greenhouses. Then they store the CO2 inside our storage systems. For example, this one in the Netherlands, what is 90 meters long and 60 meters wide, with a storage capacity of 8,500 cubes. When the sun is gone by night, the CO2 goes through the greenhouses and keeps the paprikas growing. If you want to have some more information about it, you can just reach out to me or look on our website, biogasmembrane.eu or even .com, and we will be presenting on the exhibition in Birmingham on the 10th of 11th of July. If you have any questions, just let us know. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for your presentation, Kai. One question I have here. So with so much experience all over Europe, do you see any specific challenges for your business development in the UK as compared to other countries?
No, we are already, since that MSc has funded 12 years ago, we immediately started after a year already in the UK. I think we've supplied already now more than 135 roofs in the UK, if I'm honest. And then the UK is for us Europe. We see more difficulties getting to the United States or to even those countries with high windstorms, high snow loads, and that kind of stuff. So.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Kai. I have a question here. I believe it's for Sara. Could you speak a bit more on the role of guarantees of origins?
Yeah, sure. I'm sure Nick would also be able to interject a bit on this as well, in particular from the difference now between subsidised and unsubsidised value on certification. But so obviously, in comparison to the REGOs for the electricity system, we have the gas version, or the RGGOs, which we would call the guarantees of origin, also known in the voluntary scheme as this green gas certification scheme. So this is a more voluntary based sort of set up between where you'd have a producer and an end user, and there would be a tradable sort of platform where you would obviously sell a certificate or a unit of gas, which has been deemed as eligible through that sort of guarantees of a guarantee of origin, meeting the certain criteria of what it is to be a renewable gas, and in particular if it's got to be balanced against a particular support mechanism. We mentioned RHI and we mentioned Green Gas Support Scheme, then it would have to have met the conditions or the sustainability criteria of those particular models as well. So all of that would be attributed to a unit, and that certificate that would then be tradable. The platform then will have a series of producers that are registered and similarly end users, and then that sort of value can be attributed to the purchase of that particular certificate. But it's not restricted to the UK, as I mentioned before. I think there's a lot of sales that this UK-based system will have for that UK-generated gas over in places such as Germany. There's quite a lot over in Germany and quite a lot over in Europe and elsewhere. So there's no sort of current restrictions on it. It's a virtual sort of transfer of gas. Obviously, there's been some debate about sort of greenwashing, in particular within the electrical side of that, in terms of the value for that. But I think, obviously in the green gas, we're very keen that those are attributed, and the value is increased. There was a period of time when the value did go up quite significantly. At the moment, we cannot say that there is enough there to justify the whole production of a plant on your certificates alone, but it's hoped that in the future, as the importance raises, that value will increase. So there's certainly a value that every producer is attributing, or being able to attribute to the value of the units of gas. But at the moment, it's pretty much stayed sort of relatively low. I don't know whether Nick wanted to come in on the sort of more value of this unsubsidized one, which is definitely increasing at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, yeah, great summary, really. I think that's it. I mean, those certificates are their strength is being able to track the gas from the producer to end user through a shared energy network. So they're great at doing that. And the big questions that are being asked now is, how can you tighten up the criteria, the sustainability criteria, to make sure that the certificate truly represents the carbon savings that are being claimed? So and also whether or not the energy itself is additional. So these are the sort of questions being asked at the moment. And again, yeah, the added value from an unsubsidized biomethane source is really giving an uplift to those certificates. But we at Future Biogas, we tie the energy and the certificates together as a package. And I think that's, again, also something that's probably we're gonna see more of in the market going forwards.
Thanks, everyone. There's just a few minutes left, so I want to take this time to wrap up and make sure we respect our speakers' times for today. As a reminder, the webinar recording will be shared with participants next week. If we're unable to get to your questions, we will share them with the presenters and invite them to send a response to the question via our biogas community. We invite everyone to join us on the Biogas Community platform to stay up to date with content from our UK Country Focus Month, and to participate in July's Focus Month on emerging markets, Ireland, Turkey, Greece, and Australia. I would like to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today, and thank our presenters again, Sara Bartle from the Association for Renewable Energy and Clean Technology, Dr. Nick Primmer from Future Biogas, and Kai Oosterheert from Membrane Systems Europe.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.